this 10 minutes, we're going to be brutal. We just need to extract as much information as we can from you. So let's get started. And they would just ask us what we were doing.
Welcome to Shakin Hands, where we provide the platform for entrepreneurs and thought leaders to share their stories in order to hopefully influence others to get out of the rat race and chase their own dreams. If you have any recommendations for guests or questions that you want to be asked, please don't hesitate to reach out. Anyways, if you enjoy the podcast, please like, comment, subscribe, and share in order to keep the podcast growing. Otherwise, I'm your host, Jack Moran, and this is Shakin Hands. If you're looking for business mentorship, I have a place where you can get feedback on your unique personal development and business growth challenges. Over the last year, I've brought together a group of impact-driven thought leaders where we meet every single day to discuss psychology, communication, mindset, and business case studies. We have people who have made millions of dollars, lost millions of dollars, Harvard MBAs, and new entrepreneurs like you and I. Entrepreneurship can be lonely, so if you're looking for a support system, please follow the link in the description below for some more information.
Seeing why it's not a developed country, but yes, all the potential. I agree.
Have you done much traveling?
A bit, yes. I've been to Asia, to Europe, to the US. I don't know Africa or India, but parts of Latin America. And if you compare it with other parts of Latin America, Panama is safer. It is more stable. It has got expensive in relation to our region. But yeah.
I'm going
to start or what?
Yep.
Good.
I'm going to Asia in 2 months for a month.
Okay.
Where did you go?
China.
Oh, okay.
I haven't been to Southeast Asia, Japan, all those parts, which apparently are amazing as well.
Yeah.
And very different among themselves. I mean, it's a huge region. Half of the world's population is there, so but China was really interesting. I was there in 2008, so it was like before WeChat had like WeChat Pay, so you still used cash to pay for stuff, and it was weird because it felt like a growing place, but at the same time, you would go to a random ATM and they would give you fake bills, and then they would tell you, oh, you cannot go to any ATM. You have to go to a legit ATM from these 4 banks. And you're like, oh, I had no idea. So like those types of things have changed, I think. And that doesn't happen here. Like you go to any ATM and you won't get a fake bill. So yeah, Asia's interesting.
Were you there for business or pleasure?
I was there for sort of a study abroad type of thing. So it was, I guess, more pleasure than business. I was supposed to be studying, but it was mostly getting to know the place. I was in Beijing, Shanghai, and Hong Kong, and it was really impressive. It's just the scale of things are just massive. You go to Beijing and you buy, there's this technology city where they have this market where you can buy anything technology related, and you end up bargaining the price, and then they take you to this random building with a matrix-like white corridor with, doors that are exactly the same, and you feel you're going to die there, but they just open a door and you enter a room with a bunch of boxes, and they give you the camera you wanted to buy or something.
No way.
And it's a 50-story tall tower filled with rooms with stuff that people can buy. Like it's just massive.
Wow.
But yeah.
What is your business now?
So I have a startup. It's called Cuánto, which means how much in Spanish. That was a plain words initially. And we are trying to build the local e-commerce experience for consumers and the operating system for independent entrepreneurs to sell online. What we think is e-commerce won't be the same here as it happened in the US or in Europe. And we have seen that in Asia. When you go to your trip, you'll see that e-commerce is completely different there. It's more mobile. It's more chat-based. You have apps like WeChat in China and Alipay. You have Gojek in Indonesia, and it's a completely different experience. Sometimes it has a more on-demand experience. You have social shopping where you can buy things together with your friends and get discounts, things that you don't really see as widespread in the US, where you just go into like a traditional e-commerce, like a Shopify store or an Amazon, and you buy things and they show up in your mail. And what happens in our region is, of course, we're a developing region, but we have 700 million people, which is a lot. That's half of India's population. But we have 1.5 the GDP of India. So there's more disposable income in Latin America than in India on average. And 9 out of 10 people use the internet in their phones every day, all day, every day. In India, you have 4 out of 10 people connected to the internet. That's, of course, increasing and changing rapidly. But we've seen in India huge companies emerge and huge platforms emerge that have changed the consumers and sellers' experience to be able to actually transact and sell online without barriers and without interference. And that's what we want to do here. And how it works is you just download an app and you create a little no-code store that think of it as a very simplified version of Shopify that allows anyone to put it in the link in bio, share it via WhatsApp, and integrate it in their story, content and all that. The money is processed by us. It arrives to their local bank account, and we have been rolling out new features to help sellers operate their business in a more effective way, like logistics, delivery, inventory management, and eventually we want to be their back office so you can just focus on whatever you're selling. Like it happens in more developed countries. You don't have to build everything from scratch. But in here, things are different. Like the local address system sometimes works, sometimes it doesn't, as you've probably noticed.
Mm-hmm.
So you cannot just have a normal logistics provider that ships things and puts it in the mail. Like that just doesn't work. Tracking doesn't work. Sometimes when they deliver something to your house, you're not there and they call you. So, all those things, and each country and city has their own flavor, but we think with this connectivity that I mentioned before, it can be solved and we can just unlock a ton of value for people that want to sell online.
Yeah, what's up with the addresses here? It's incredible to me that
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's something that happens in many cities in Latin America, not in the larger ones. If you go to Mexico City or if you go to Bogota or if you go to some other larger cities, you have an address system. The thing is, smaller cities and countries that have become very car-centric just don't care about addresses. And it's also some, ineptitude of the local government that they just don't have that in order. But Waze and Google Maps and all these apps to solve the problem. You don't really need an address. You just send the PIN and people show up. So why invest, $50 million or whatever the amount is in aggregate for a neighborhood to put all the, street numbers and the signs and everything if you just have a free way of doing it. But it is super frustrating. And every country has its own flavor. We also operate in Costa Rica, for example, which is where I was originally born. And in Costa Rica, the way addresses work is you have a reference point and you use cardinal points. So you say, from the McDonald's of this place, 2 blocks north, 1 block east. And that's how people say things. Of course, you would have to know where north is or where south is. And you eventually do. It's really weird. When I go to Costa Rica, I have this like ingrained radar in my brain that knows like a compass that actually works. But that is an absurd inefficiency for logistics and transportation in general. So every country has its flavor. In Nicaragua, it's like the mountain or the lake. And the Bogota has a rational system, but that's not true in most of the developing world. Africa's like that. Parts of Asia are like that. And yeah, that's another example of things that just work and people never really question how they would affect their lives if they just didn't work. because it's complicated. You don't have mail, you don't have a mail room. The mail might arrive 2 months later to your home, or might just get lost. So you have to use other providers to send your stuff. Yeah, it's a different reality.
How'd you get into this business?
Well, it's a long story, but I'm originally a lawyer, and I discovered crypto in 2012, and it blew my mind on how something was going to change the landscape and the way money moves around. So the money movement part of things was what interested me more. And then I realized that practicing law, although it can be sometimes a lucrative career and very interesting, especially in this part of the world, if you do it in a corporate way, it won't really change the way society works. It will just sort of guard trust between people. That's what lawyers do. You have a contract with another person, and you want something that's time tested. You want something that works. And the lawyer will make sure that you're using the right structure that's time tested, that works, that is legit, and that it will protect your interests and will align your, whatever you need with your counterparty. That is not what disruption looks like. That is not what creates new value at scale. And that just hit me in the face like a train. And I was like, I have to do something, and started startup, which is the easiest way to do it. Right now, we have software. You don't really need to move atoms around. You can just, code. And now with AI and vibe coding and everything, it's just become way, way less expensive and easier. So we started with allowing people to send a payment link via social media, and that evolved into this e-commerce vision that we have now. And we were accepted by Y Combinator
Nice.
in the US. We're the first Central American company, Panamanian company that got in. And they were at the time really focused in Latin America. Now their focus is AI, of course. And that blew our minds, because it sort of validated that what we are trying to do is something that is possible to build. When we were there, we met other founders who have done this type of attempts in Indonesia, in Africa, in the Middle East, and simply trying to bring tools that have already created the modern world in other parts of the world, but adapt them to the local experience in a way that really unlocks value for people. So that seemed more fun than law. And yeah, that was about 6 years ago. So ever since, it's a roller coaster. Of course, sometimes very frustrating, sometimes really interesting and exciting. And yeah, that's how it happened.
What is the experience of a Y Combinator like?
I would say pressure is the word that comes to mind. The interview process is really brutal. When you get to the final round, it's a 10-minute interview.
How many rounds is it?
I think it depends.
So just walk me through the kind of start to finish on it.
So at the time we applied when they created something that was called the Startup School. So it was like a MOOC where you could just take a startup course with all the YC lore that we had read over the years, all the advice that Paul Graham has given, and Sam Altman, etc. You would get in, you would be assigned in this peer group with a YC alumnus that would sort of coach you and mentor you. And I think 1,000 best startups would get a grant. And we said like, oh, okay, we want a grant from YC. We've been reading Hacker News for a long time. We want a grant from YC and we want to learn. So we did that, and they accepted everyone. 15,000 startups from around the world, which was insane. They said it was an accident, but I think it was a brilliant marketing ploy, because what they said is, we accepted the 15,000. They scaled it up with YC alums, and there were a ton of clusters around the world, like basically just pitching what they were doing and sharing weekly feedback and all that. And then they said, for you to be eligible for the grant, you should apply to the full batch. You need to apply to the full batch. We're like, okay, we want the grant. We probably won't get in because, Central America is small. No one cares about this part of the world. We applied. And they answered and they said, "Oh, we have questions about your startup." We hopped on a call with a partner, and then we got an email inviting us to Mountain View and saying, "Hey, we want to meet you in person. Come on December 12th." So we flew to California and we got to the then YC headquarters because now they moved to San Francisco. And there were three partners in a table. One of them is Michael Siebel, who co-founded Twitch. And in other rooms, there were people like Paul Buchheit, who invented Gmail, and those types of people. And we were like, okay, we're going to talk with them for 10 minutes. And they would say, hey, this 10 minutes, we're going to be brutal. We just need to extract as much information as we can from you. So let's get started. And they would just ask us what we were doing. And there's a way to prepare. They have in the internet, they have Paul Graham generator, simulator generators and all that. Because one of the things they say that entrepreneurs often have trouble with is explaining what they do. What are you building? What is it what you do? And people get all muddled and they answer and you don't understand. So once we finished the interview, we went to have some burgers in Palo Alto, and that night we got a call and they said, hey, we want to fund you. And we were like, oh, holy shit. We didn't expect that. We said, yes, of course. And we flew to California in January after the holidays and stayed there for 3 months. And the way it works, and I think the batches still work like that, is you have a weekly dinner where a founder shows up, normally a successful founder. We had Airbnb founders, Patrick Collison from Stripe, the Rappi founders from Colombia, and a bunch of others. And it would be off-the-record conversations with dinner with other founders from your batch. You could ask questions and then just an informal mingling with people. And then we would have group meetings, and you could have one-on-one partner meetings with whichever partner you want. And then you get access to the book face, which is their internal social network, where you get sort of like a Hacker News, but for YC founders. You get discounts, you get deals, you get an investor database where you can see if the investor has been an asshole with someone else, or if it's a good investor or not. And that network is for life, so you can just be part of that network and still ask questions and ask for advice, help, etc. So for us, definitely it was super transformational and opened our minds that we wanted to do this for Panama or for Central America, and we're like, no, let's think bigger. Like, why only Latin America? Or why not globally? Why just Central America? Like people in Bolivia have the same problem. Or at least try to find out if that's the case. Yeah, it was really cool.
What was the biggest takeaway from that experience? Biggest aha moment that you had?
Well, there's a lot, but first you have to believe a super ambitious story if you want to build it before building it. That's something counterintuitive. Here in Latin America, we sort of, and it depends on the person, of course, but we sometimes feel when we speak with people in the US that people in the US know how to sell themselves. It's like, oh, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I talk about myself. It's like ingrained in your culture. In here, depending on the country, that is frowned upon. You don't brag about what you're doing. It feels braggy sometimes. However, to overcome inertia and to put an image in another person's mind of something that doesn't exist, you have to vividly describe it. And if you don't describe it in a way that's compelling, no one is going to believe that story. So the first step is you have to believe it yourself. And that is a super hard thing that has been years in the works for me. You have to literally tell other people in their face, we're building something that could be huge, and you have to tell them how and what's your vision and believe it. Also know that it has a lot of risk, and it is actually unlikely because most startups fail. but you have to say it with a conviction in a way that you feel you're not lying and you're not scamming people. So that's a delicate balance. Here in Latin America, we sometimes have, sketchy people that, do things that sound impossible or sound scammy. So in here we sort of equalize thinking outrageously ambitiously with something that's basically a scam. And that is not true. Those are two separate things. One thing is something that hasn't been built, and the other is a proper scam. And there's maybe a gray area between the two. So I would say the biggest takeaway is just when you're going to create something new, define that vision with a very, very, very high resolution in a way that you yourself believe it, so you can then share it with others and paint that picture vividly in their minds. And then that will be the fuel to build it, or to try to build it at least. That is something no one tells you here, because we don't have huge startup successes in Latin America, with some minor exceptions. So that mentality is never taught.
Very interesting. Is the legal system in Costa Rica the same as Panama?
No, it's similar. It's civil law.
Can you practice law here in Panama?
I actually studied in Costa Rica. I studied law in Costa Rica, so I'm licensed in Costa Rica. Panama, I can't sign documents or do certain things that are for barred attorneys, but I could give sort of basically help other licensed attorneys do the work. I was a junior associate at the time at a firm here. But the principles are the same. We, in Latin America, we have what we call a civil law jurisdiction, which is as opposed to common law, which is what you have in the US, with some exceptions, like Louisiana has civil law and some other states. It's more codified. You have like a civil code, and it's based in Roman law, basically. So the principles are very similar. It's the same language. Of course, the constitution varies and some laws varies, but you can sort of understand the principles and transpose things in a very easy way.
So what are the differences between Latin America and the US?
So the US and most like Anglo-Saxon countries, they have something called common law, which is law that's created by the judges. So it's created by legal precedent.
Is that like stare decisis or whatever?
More or less. Stare decisis is one of those institutions. So basically, you have statutes, what we call laws here. So your Congress or your parliament or whatever approves a law, and then that law is tested in a court, and that judge sort of refines.
This is here in the US?
In the US.
Okay.
Refines the way that law is interpreted. And with stare decisis, what that means is that you have a uniform sort of hierarchical system where lower courts have to enforce the opinions of higher courts. In our system, we also have laws or statutes that are approved by our legislative assemblies, but then judges interpret the law however they want. So the law, like what the parliament does, is stronger than what the judge says. In the end, it ends up being similar. You have the same Roman law principles that have been time tested for thousands of years, but the power of the judge in our countries is weaker than in the US and in the UK and Australia and all these countries. So you have to, the institutions are different, litigation works differently, and yeah. We can geek out about this if you want, but it's in my opinion, common law has proven to be a more flexible system, and at the same time, a more precise system in the way it applies.
Here is common law?
No,
okay.
The US.
Okay, gotcha.
So you have, for example, startups. Startups use normally. They used to incorporate in the US mostly. Every YC startup, for example, almost every YC startup is incorporated in the US, at least their holding company. We're a Delaware C corporation. And the last time I checked, YC only invests in US corporations, Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, and Singapore. That's it. All of them, I think, except Luxembourg, are common law jurisdictions. So they understand it. And the principles of like vesting shares and all that stuff is something that's well understood. Here in Panama, you can have a legal document where people vest shares, but it's not something that's commonly done, and judges probably won't understand it, not because they're dumb, but because it's just not an institution that is common, and people just don't have it. So, every country has like their specialty, and even in the US, states have sort of, you don't incorporate in Kansas, you incorporate in Delaware or in Texas if you're Elon Musk and you don't like the rules from Delaware and all that. So that happens for startups as well. And startups in Latin America now, for example, are incorporating mostly in Cayman. It has a tax benefit, and we segued into law.
Yeah, so the reason why I ask is because that's a major concern or talking point as we're starting to channel U.S. investment to Latin America.
Yeah.
Like I just did a $400,000 raise over the past couple of weeks to Latin America for a land development.
Yeah.
And obviously the contracts are a big piece. Like we're collateralizing that, loan agreement, and understanding, which I don't understand. Luckily those investors have a trust in me.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have been able to make that case to someone that I didn't know to raise that money, because they don't understand the path to recourse if I don't pay back that note. Does it work similarly in Panama? Like if they say I defaulted on that loan, would it be difficult for them to recuperate that collateral, or?
Well, it depends on how you structure it. But yeah, that is precisely a problem we have here. First, the legal system in less developed countries is less trustworthy. There's more corruption, it's more cumbersome, it's less predictable, and that's, I think, one of the good incentives common law jurisdictions do offer, which, because the law is created mostly by the way judges interpret the law, then every legal precedent has to be public and has to be widely available for everyone. Here in Panama, for example, and this is not the case in every Latin American country. In Costa Rica, they are public as well, all court rulings. But here in Panama, they're not really public. I mean, they print them somewhere and you can go get them, but you don't have a search engine where you can actually search the way a specific rule has been interpreted. So that sort of undermines the way you can actually predict how a specific clause in a contract will be interpreted. However, when you're talking about land, which is something that's, really common, and there's a lot of, banks have to, when they give you a mortgage, you have land as collateral. That works. That works here. That works in most countries, unless there's a big sort of corruption scandal around or it's a politically charged case. In Panama, fortunately, collateral execution works. We have a ton of banks here. However, I would consider just like mixing and matching the best things of both worlds. If you're going to have equity, and this is not legal advice, but just my opinion, if you're going to have equity investors, or that are going to invest in a convertible instrument like a safe, just don't use Panama as the jurisdiction to base it on. But if you need to collateralize something with Panamanian land because you're doing some development here, then you need some local instrument to do that. And you can maybe even match both. You can have, part of the investment could be a convertible note and another part could be a proper loan with a collateral that you have to pay back in whatever time. So it depends on what you want. It's not that our legal systems suck. They're just sometimes slower, less efficient, less predictable. But sometimes you need them because if you're doing local things like land development, the land is here, it's not in the US. So you can't use US law or like a US court to enforce a contract like that.
Right.
So it depends.
Very interesting. Where do you see the opportunities within Panama? How do you see this as like a business culture, and where do the opportunities lie?
Well, the cool thing about Panama is it has been traditionally way more politically stable than the rest of the region with its back and forths. We had a dictatorship until 1989. However, this dictatorship, at least I mean, the ended up being a corrupt, basically financed by drug dealing. That was how it worked. And then the US invaded and toppled Noriega, who was this general. However, the policies in Panama have been largely the same, irrespective of who wins. We don't think like Argentinians do or like Venezuelans have done. Like, are we going to be communists, or are we going to accept people can own their property every 5 years or every 4 years or every 6 years? That is what happens in most parts of Latin America, where you don't have a broad agreement on the business model for the country. You have a lot of deficiencies and suffering, and there's a lot of poverty or people that feel left out. So there's no agreement on how we're going to take Mexico forward, or Colombia, which basically had a civil war until recently, or Argentina, which is now has a super capitalist president, but had this crazy socialist regime before. So that doesn't allow you to plan ahead. Panama, fortunately, is stable in that regard, irrespective of who wins, with very important distinctions in, are you going to tackle corruption? Are you going to strengthen our institutions? Are you going to do X, Y, Z? No one really questions that Panama lives from serving the rest of the world. From keeping the canal independent and neutral, from building value chains around logistics, around the canal, for having an open services industry. So that is a really cool thing, and I think Panama could become a sort of, serve the function of what Singapore does in Southeast Asia, or Dubai does in the Middle East. It sort of already does regionally, but not as powerfully as it could. And that is, because we're changing from a more old school generation to a newer generation. And I think it's a matter of time, hopefully. Additionally, Panama is also a smallish market, and it can be a testing ground for Latin America. So you can launch here, and that was our logic, and we also knew the market. So let's launch in Panama, which is a country that has less developed financial infrastructure than other countries in Latin America, but it has this stability. We can test the value proposition and then get more complicated with different currencies and all the craziness that happens in the rest of the region. I think Panama is a great sort of Latin American lab that could be a launching pad for cool projects that can serve the region and can serve the world. And I think people accept that. Whereas in other countries, nationalism sort of closes mentalities, or, there's a revolution, or they expropriate you, or etc. I hope at least that's the case. That's the opportunity.
So we're seeing in the US, there's a lot of attention going to Costa Rica. There's a huge movement of investment from the US to Costa Rica, where I see, in my own intuition, Panama having a lot more of the intrinsic qualities of a destination that is investable. What is your take on those two destinations?
Well, I was born in Costa Rica, and I have lived in Panama all my life and became a Panamanian. So I know both countries, I think, fairly decently. And what I would say is Costa Rica has a more predictable legal system. Costa Rica is, on average, a more educated society. People are more, in general, professionalized in some way. I think it happened out of need. They don't have a canal. They don't have a huge logistics center like Panama. So they had to say, hey, we're going to just take care of our jungles and our animals and create this tourist destination. And when you create a tourist destination like that, people get there and they are like, oh, we can invest here. We can live here. They actually go enjoy the place. It's not just a place that gives you services in an offshore way, which is what Panama has done. It's not that Panama's strategy has been bad. It's just that Panama, I think, it's a younger democracy. From 1989, we had a dictatorship like we discussed before. the population is less educated than Costa Rica. We still have, widespread literacy rates and all that, but Costa Rica has a better public education system and, in general, a larger tradition. A bigger chunk of Costa Rica's population speaks English, for example. Panama's fairly bilingual, but it's not at that level. You can walk around here in Panama City and go to a coffee shop, and maybe the person who sells you the coffee will not speak English. In Costa Rica, 90% probably will, because it's a tourist economy. So what I think is Costa Rica has done a great job sort of giving you the free trial when you visit. You go there and you go to any part in the country and you will find good and bad experiences, but you will find great experiences in almost every part you go. And in Panama, for example, sometimes you won't get a great service depending on where you are in the country. So I think Panama has a lot to learn from Costa Rica in that regard. But I agree with you that it is sort of like a rough diamond, Panama, because there's the same jungles, the same beaches, the same monkeys, the same animals, the same weather, the same temperature, with a better connected airport that already serves the rest of the world. Like, if Panama could learn those things and sort of incorporate them, Panama would be a way more attractive destination. The question is whether those education issues and sort of, corruption and legal certainty issues will be solved in a way that will compete effectively against Costa Rica.
Wow, interesting. What would be, and this is my final question, if you had to give entrepreneurs one piece of advice that you've learned through your entrepreneurial journey, what would it be?
Well, in addition to what I mentioned on believing your own crazy vision, I would say fall in love with the problem first instead of the solution. Many people, and this has happened to me, and it's sometimes I have to keep myself in check. We fall in love with whatever we are selling with a solution. I'm building this app for you to do X, or I'm building this, real estate development for Y. What is the problem you're solving? What does that thing will give to people? Not the actual product you're selling, but what need will that product fulfill? And if you intimately understand that, you can first actually solve a real problem in whatever way you define that. And also you can flexibly change and move depending on the circumstances, because if the problem, you understand it correctly, then the solutions can change over time. But the problem will be solved by, you will do attempt 1, attempt 2, attempt 3, attempt 4. The problem is still there. So your mission has not been completed. Whereas if one solution fails and it was your baby and you fell in love with that, you're discouraged. You're like, shit, the baby died. So, I'm going to go get a corporate job. And guess what? When you start a startup, especially in a part of the world where there's a ton of problems to solve, many of those babies will die. You will probably fail in many of those solutions. So you will have to iterate. You will have to pivot. You will have to, learn from whatever blind spots you had. So yeah, fall in love with the problem and not the solution, at least first.
Very good advice. If people are interested in connecting with you or interested in your services, where can they find you?
Cool. Well, my personal social media is Felcheck, Felcheck, and Cuanto is Cuanto.app, Cuanto. I guess you can edit or something.
Yeah, we'll put those in the link.
But yeah, we're like that in social media, or web.cuanto.app. And yeah, anyone who's starting a business or trying to sell in Latin America, let me know.
You had a lot of great insights, and it's apparent that you have a very good bird's eye view on the market here, which was very valuable to me. So I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for the chat.
Yep, for sure.